All right, so for today's video, let's go over another motion. Let's say the motion was this House believes that social media companies should be compelled to show differing political views to their users. And yeah, let's just start the prep time and then get right into it. So I guess like immediately, a few things that you'd see or question when you're looking at the motion is to what extent would this likely happen in terms of what different political views are you going to show? And also, why is it necessary that this happen in a social media setting or through social media companies? And I'm sure many of you would already come to mind and you'd immediately think that, well, this is a debate about political polarization and how political polarization has done significant harm or has been exacerbated through social media algorithms, through misinformation and disinformation online, and how this has made our world much worse in significant ways. So I do think that it's quite important to start off with a very strong contextualization and framing as to why political polarization is necessarily harmful. Because, of course, if you're thinking about what opposition strategies here are, opposition has two strategies basically. The first strategy is to explain that, well, political polarization is not necessarily bad, and they could say that it's perfectly fine for people to be entrenched in their own echo chambers or their own political viewpoints in social media because they enjoy it, and also because they might even argue that it's a safe space for a lot of these people to be with people that they agree with, and are able to access that discourse without having to feel that they are a threat of being exposed to political discourse that they might not necessarily want to go into social media for. So that might be one way that they might contextualize their strategy. Another way they might strategize, or which is a little bit softer but still realistic, is to say that, well, this is not an effective strategy. So opposition might say that if a social media company does this, it's very counterintuitive. It might be very harmful to how people operate on social media, because it might mean that some people might be exposed to misinformation and disinformation even more, and it might mean that some people might just leave social media entirely. And so opposition might even argue another thing here that says that, well, this is just a problem solution mismatch, that we could have otherwise just trusted like fact checking mechanisms online. We could solve political polarization in other ways. So notice that these are two different strategies that kind of like they overlap at some point, but they are a bit different in the sense that one of them agrees that political polarization is a problem, but there are other ways to solve it. And the other one is like a little bit more hardline stance that says political polarization is not a bad thing, and so we should be able to access social media however we want. And so I do think that if you were to be OG here, and this is how I would prep it immediately, I would start off first with the framing of why is political polarization necessarily harmful. And then I would say a few things here, like just a brief explanation as to why it is an absolute harm that must be considered in this debate. The first is that it creates social divides between communities, lack of empathy. So people have less empathy towards the political views of others. They create larger stereotypes or worse stereotypes against other individuals. It increases that type of hate and anger. It worsens that type of discourse. Number two, you might even argue that political polarization, it it's individually worse. Stops people from interrogating their own beliefs. And then you might even just explain that this is the theory of confirmation bias. They only look for information that supports their belief, and so they become less critical. So the more entrenched they are into an echo chamber, the worse of a person they become as a political citizen. And they can't even know this. They don't know that they are becoming more entrenched in this belief, because when you're in a community for so long and you know this, and you're not necessarily aware of it, you see the same content all the time, you think everyone in your society agrees with you, you as an individual simply become, like, more to the extreme with the political belief that you currently have. And then maybe lastly, you might have another social consequence. It undermines democratic systems. So it's also related to the other two consequences, that it makes people individually worse, but it also creates social divides. But on a macro scale, it simply creates a less legitimate political democratic system, because some people are more susceptible to disinformation online because of how vulnerable and susceptible they are, because they're socially conditioned to accept these types of political views. So the more factually incorrect that information is, but as long as they align with their political belief, then it also makes them vote for that same political system or political belief, no matter what, at all costs, even if the factual basis of what they're supporting is necessarily wrong. So of course, you're arguing that the theory behind this is that democracy requires compromise and consensus, but political polarization is directly harmful to that. So I think these are all clear harms as to why political polarization is necessarily bad, and why you would conclude this framing by simply saying that if we can demonstrate that social media exacerbates political polarization, then it is necessary that we must mitigate and repair this at all costs, or as much as possible. And so I think this is fantastic, right? We already have our framing. We've already preempted the potential strategy of opposition that, oh, we could just fact check, or oh, we could just accept that political polarization is a good thing. We've already demonstrated why it is necessarily harmful. And now with this massive framing, all we need to do is just demonstrate that social media makes this worse, and that our solution is going to be successful. So now I think we can proceed. Actually, no, before this, I just wanted to be very explicit as to why it is a preemption. Why does this preempt opposition? This preempts op because if they explain that political polarization is good for safe spaces or good for their own interactions online, we say that the consequences of political polarization are much worse because they are larger in scale and they are unprecedented, and people do not necessarily consent to becoming the more extreme versions of themselves that they grow into in social media. All right, so now we just do this argument. So the first argument we would demonstrate, sorry, I'll just show this a little bit clearer on the screen. Now we can make our argument here. Our first argument would be that social media exacerbates political polarization, and showing differing views mitigates this. So how does social media do this? This is the relatively easier part of the argumentation, of the argument that we're wanting to make. So in my head right now, I already know that I don't really need to give too many reasons for this. I only need to explain why it makes it worse, or why social media, its design, it is something that cannot be repaired, or that fact checking can never fix this. And all of this, it's inherent to the design of social media as it currently is, and why it's difficult for people to opt out of the current political belief or echo chamber that they're already in. So if I can demonstrate this in the argument, then it's already sufficient. I don't need to do that so much more. So I would say the following: algorithms entrench people into certain news feeds in the following ways. They get recommended the same content, and it is very difficult to naturally search for new content because every succeeding search is dependent on your history. It's based on virality, so it's based on virality, which means that you are susceptible to sensationalist and clickbait content online, and your friends, your communities closest to you, whom you trust and whom you likely have a close affiliation with will likely have similar political beliefs to you as well, and they are the ones whose content you see the most online. So these are all just simple illustrations that explain why algorithms, as they're currently designed, make it very difficult for people to opt out of social media, and that is why you become more entrenched into your echo chamber, therefore making you more racist, therefore making you more extreme, therefore all of the other stuff that we explained earlier for why political polarization is harmful. So we don't need to do that impacting anymore in the argument. So now all we need to do is demonstrate that we can solve it. So how does showing alternative, differing content fix this? Wait, sorry. Let me just add in here the preemption. This explains why fact checking is insufficient online, and that this is an inherent problem on social media due to the design of the platform and how it only shows one-dimensional content. So we cannot trust in organic change. That's just a fantastic solution for this one, right? You cannot trust in organic change. We have to do a design change, and that is why this design change is fantastic. So now we go here. How does showing alternative differing content fix this? Well, a few reasons as to why this might likely work, or why this is likely to be done successful. And I note that it's quite important here that this is a very, very difficult part of the argument too, because you know that opposition will say, no, it's not that believable. People just might leave the platform altogether. And of course, I'm afraid of that argument as well. But I think that it's quite easy to later on give a preemption that says that, if opposition says that people will just be turned off by the platform, this is simply unrealistic, because social media is so entrenched in our lives, and often people will not always notice that these are always completely unreasonable and deplorable content that they should turn away from, which is actually a reasonable thing. Actually, like, you want to give the framing, it's like a mitigation framing that says that a lot of the content that is different from your political view, like if you're left-wing and you see right-wing content, or if you're right-wing and you see left-wing content, or even if you see moderate content, it's more than likely that if you are using the same facts, if you are using the same information, people can look at these interpretations and reasonably see that that these are real life experiences, human experiences that are not so different from their own. So now I know here, right? How does alternative content fix this? People see that that there are different human experiences that they do not always get to understand and feel. So we bridge the empathy gap here, because human emotional experience is more universal. And differing content on political viewpoints doesn't always have to be so extreme, and this recommendation platform can be done incrementally and very well too. All right, yeah, perfectly fine. These are all reasonable claims to make here. We're just saying that this is going to be done well, it's going to be done effectively, we can't trust an organic change, and that we can also preempt all the other arguments as to why this happens. All right, so it's obviously time. I don't want to overstay my prep time here. We didn't get to do that much of a second argument, but I want to note that like this is still an effective prep time. To be fair, one thing I wanted to teach in this particular video is that there is actually a fantastic way to just immediately make an entire argument, a quote unquote argument, out of like the framing. So this is really just an argument. It's basically its own argument at this point, where we're saying that yeah, political polarization is terrible. This preempts all the reasons of opposition. So even if opposition agrees with you, right? Like as long as you say that social media, like with this argument later on, like uniquely does this and it worsens it in a massive way, then opposition is already in the back foot. They're already having much difficulty in responding to this because now they're the ones that have to demonstrate that like there are other ways that we could solve political polarization. But if they don't agree with this, then they have two hurdles to beat. The first hurdle is the hurdle of like political polarization being bad, and the second hurdle on like social media is not that bad anyways, right? So there's a lot that opposition already has to respond to from the very beginning here, which I think is a really, really great thing that you should always practice whenever you're making and prepping motions like this. All right, the link will be on the description if you want to look through this document. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.